A prayer. Lord God, help us to recognise that you are present in all places, in all people, and in all things, even when we are overcome by fear and loneliness. May we know your presence with us. For Jesus' sake. Amen. Welcome to my chalet, my sort of prayer house. I'm not sure I preach from here, but I just felt it was the place to be for this week. Down the centuries, many people have recognised that in the life of Jesus Christ, we see an image of the nature of God. There is something about the way Jesus lived his life that expresses how God is. And even though it happened 20 centuries ago, we can still see a surprisingly clear portrait of God in the life of Jesus. Of course, there is something mysterious and hard to fathom about Jesus as well. It's often difficult to grasp quite what's going on in some of his teaching. But God has given us so much else as well. The windows into the nature of God to help us understand. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about a Hebrew word that I've really found helpful recently. A small word with a big meaning, a word that doesn't quite fit into the English language. Hesed, loving kindness, compassion and mercy. And I'm finding other Hebrew words helpful, and of course the Hebrew scriptures, which give us just an amazing window into the mystery of the nature of God. And a growing favourite passage for me is the one that John has just read to us. It seems to sum up the heart of the good news, that God is to be found everywhere, in all situations, even in difficult circumstances, even in all people. Now Jacob was running for his life, having conspired with his mother Rebekah to rob his older twin Esau of his birthright and to deceive his father Isaac into giving him the blessing of the firstborn. Perhaps you remember the story. And now he is heading for the only safe place that he knew, his mother's family in far-off Haran. A young man away from home on his own, probably for the first time, frightened, alone and desperate. Feeling probably that he'd just gone beyond the point of no return. He would have felt the weight of his lying and deceiving, no longer having his mum to tell him that it was all okay. He was now cast out from his family and from the God of his parents. And in the midst of all this, he has an amazing dream. A ladder between earth and heaven, with angels ascending and descending, full of deep symbolism, a connection with the God of his parents when all seemed lost and broken. God speaks words of promise, comfort, and reassuring. Promise that he will have offspring. So he won't be killed by his brother or die on the journey. He's also promised a future land to live in and God's presence to go with him. I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you till I have done what I promised you. Then Jacob woke up from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. What an amazing experience, and how encouraging to us. Perhaps you felt like Jacob in these last weeks, frightened, alone, and desperate. As I was encouraging you a few weeks ago, maybe you could pour out some of this to God in lament and complaint and in tears of frustration. For despite your isolation, your pain and distress, God is still with you. And he wants you to know that he is still present with you. He is there to be found, but somehow we need our eyes to be opened in order to see him. You might feel like Jacob in that you've gone beyond the reach of God's love and forgiveness. That you don't deserve God's promise, his comfort and his reassuring. And I've been there more times than I like to remember. And God is annoying because he ought not to forgive us. But he does. Time and time again. When we open up to him, we find love. We find forgiveness. We find acceptance. As Mike was saying like last week, there is now no condemnation. But what strikes Jacob is that this place is a place of God's presence. It's, well, to borrow Moses' experience, holy ground. He thinks that he's stumbled upon a holy place. But I think there's a greater truth here, and that is that God can be found anywhere and everywhere. And this is really what we've been discovering in last years. So many I've talked to you. That as we meet with God in prayer and worship in church or at home, we also meet God in a powerful way in the natural world, in the woods and on the hills. And we're stepping towards the fact that God is not restricted to any place. In fact, he is in all places. And in these weeks of lockdown, we have found that we can meet with God for worship in our homes or wherever you might be. You don't even need a screen. It's a great discovery. And yes, some of us are keen to meet for worship in church again. But I get the feeling that is because we know that we meet with God in a special way when we are together. Even as yet we can't sing or converse. There's something about gathering as God's people. And some of you, I know, don't feel ready for that. You feel the risks are too great, and I do understand that. It must be your decision, and I think the risks are, in many ways, untried. So many of us are vulnerable for one reason or another, and we owe it to God and to each other to keep safe and to keep each other safe. So how can we find ways to discover God more and more wherever we are? How can we step out in faith and put ourselves in the way of noticing God? Perhaps in a place of work, or where you might volunteer, or where you shop, or for your leisure time. Whatever you might be able still to do with all the current restrictions. What might it mean for you to be more aware of God? For him to open your eyes a bit more to the God who made all that there is. And in the life of Jesus shows that he is present in some way in the ordinary stuff of life and matter. And maybe to discover that God, as he is in all things, he is in all people. And this is an even greater challenge. Can we see something of God, that glimmer of his image in all the people we meet, not just those, the people of faith? I think to do that, we need to get to know people a bit better, to see beyond the sort of veneer that we all create, which often hides the deeper stuff. For it is beneath that veneer we see through, and I've come across this so often, when people open up to me as a vicar, and you get to sense their compassion, their love, their care for their family or whoever. And of course there is a challenge for us too, that we are able to display something of the image of God that is in us, despite our failures, and there may be many. There is that sense that God is at work deep within us, bubbling up inside us. And through our vulnerability, through letting down our veneer, we can let people see God in us. So, Jacob began a new journey with God through this encounter in the dream. A journey of discovery. A journey of discovering that God was greater than he ever imagined. And we too can take that journey. Our eyes can be opened. And we can hear God speak to us as he spoke to Jacob. Because he says the same words to us that he said to Jacob. He whispers in your ear that through whatever else you're going through, and there may be a tumult of all sorts of emotions and confusion and pain and regret, God still says, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go. I will not leave you. Amen.